You mentioned that you learned some things from the farm, hard work being one of those. What are some things that you think, other than the hard work aspect of it, that are serving you well now?
Definitely like communication. There's a lot of that on a farm. Obviously, the hard work. I think it's just embracing challenges too. There's always something on the farm. Every day is a new day.
Right.
And every day is going to bring up something different. And I feel like in the field of forensic science, that is very much what it is.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what made me appreciate it so much, and why I am a person that likes just about everything, because not every day is going to be the same day.
Yeah.
And I love that, because I love trying new things or solving a new problem.
Hey Jordan, how's it going?
Good, Prateek. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you so much for doing this.
Of course.
Appreciate it. Before we get started, if you could let everybody know on the internet who you are, what you do, any likes and dislikes in personal life, academic life, anything and everything you want to share about yourself.
Okay, sounds good. So I'm Jordan Walter. I'm a master's student here at UCO. That's how I met you.
Yes.
So doing my master's in forensic science with the molecular biology concentration. I've only been in Oklahoma for about 2 years. I came from Canada, so I grew up in the province of Saskatchewan. I did my undergrad in Ontario. That kind of got disrupted with COVID, so I did a little bit of time there back in Saskatchewan and decided I wanted to go do my master's, so that's what brought me down here. My undergrad is in forensic science and biology, so I've always just had like a really big passion for the science side of stuff. I was that student in high school that like took every science class possible. I just love it, and especially biology. Like I just have such a huge passion for that. And then also animals. I just adore animals, and especially cows. I grew up on a farm, so that's a big passion of mine. I like to tell people that I'm just a person that likes just about anything and everything. Like, I just love being around others. I love being outside, just exploring. I will say, though, it's been kind of hard the past few weeks. I am not used to this Oklahoma heat, like, at all. It has been a challenge a little bit, considering this is my first summer down here. But yeah.
Oh, is it really?
It is.
Oh, okay.
I went home last summer. So this has just definitely been a change for me. And then I went home for 2 weeks at the beginning of June. So coming back and just dead in the heat of it, I was like, wow, I don't know how I'm going to survive the rest of this summer. Thank goodness for pools. That's all I can say. But
fair.
Yeah, that kind of sums up me.
Okay, cool. You mentioned you like almost everything. Is there anything you don't like? It could be as simple as doing certain chores.
I hate dishes.
Okay.
Hate dishes. Probably dishes and laundry. Putting away laundry. Like, I'll let it sit
Specifically
there.
putting away laundry, as in washing them, or like folding them and putting it?
Folding them and putting them away.
Okay.
Like, putting them into the washing machine and then the dryer, sure.
Right.
Like, that's easy.
Yeah.
The folding them to put them away, no.
Yeah.
I like to tell people you don't want to look in my drawers at home because they're just a disaster, because I just shove. Like, I don't even fold anymore.
Okay, I'm sorry to cut you off there, but I was going to say, Shelby mentioned a similar thing. We're all classmates, again, like Jordan mentioned earlier, and Shelby mentioned that she did not doing laundry either.
I don't know, like, there's just something about it. I don't know if it's like the time that it takes, but like, the other thing is like putting socks together. I hate having to put socks
Very
together.
Specific. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Literally. But I would probably say either putting away clothes or washing dishes. Dishwashers are like a saving grace. I would not be able to live without one.
Fair. They do make life easier for sure. I never grew up with a dishwasher though, so I've always been used to washing dishes. I actually don't mind doing dishes. Laundry, I have to do it. That's why I do it.
Yeah.
So I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
How do you sort your socks? Or you don't?
Well, I mean, I do, but like, I don't know. My mom thinks that the way I do laundry is just insane. She like has 5 different piles and like pinks in one, whites in the other. I just dump them all in, okay? All my clothes go in at the same time. If they bleed, they bleed. Like, I don't know.
We'll figure it out later. Yeah.
Mom, I pay for laundry. Like, I have to pay. I'm not sorting into 5 different piles. But usually it's just one of those things that, like, if everything's getting dumped in, all my socks are just in there. So when you're, like, picking through the pile to try and find what matches where, there's probably every time I do laundry, there's 2 that don't find their match and they're just left there and it'll end up being stuck to a shirt somewhere. Just the joys of laundry.
For sure, for sure. I've lost, I think, a few pairs of socks in washers and dryers more specifically. So now, just to avoid that from happening, I like circle the entire dryer a couple of times after I take everything out to make sure that anything that's stuck anywhere just falls down and make sure I have all my socks. But yeah, what made you interested in forensics?
I was that kid growing up, and I shouldn't really say kid, like teen, probably from the time I was like 13, 14 until I was in 12th grade that like was obsessed with crime shows. Criminal Minds was a huge one that I watched all the time. And there was a couple like Canadian-based shows. One, it's called Flashpoint. It's based in Toronto. And I just fell in love with those. And I would just be watching them all the time. I don't think it was really until I got to grade 12 that I was like, this is for sure what I want to do. For the longest time, I wanted to be a veterinarian. But I actually, in 11th grade, I think, got to sit in for like 6 months at a vet office. And I couldn't do it. Like, I couldn't go into surgeries. I just found it too hard to be a part of it. And kind of from then on, it was like, okay, what do I want to do? I don't know right now. But I knew that I just had this passion for crime solving and getting to do those different things. And I loved science. And it was actually my dad who found this university in Ontario. And it's really funny because the university is called Trent University and my dad's name is Trent. So when he brought this idea to me, I was like, this is some made up stuff. Like, what are you talking about? There's no way. And he was like, no, like, this is actually a place.
It is an actual place.
Yeah. Wow. And it's kind of one of the only ones across Canada that offers forensic science, but different areas of forensic science. So a lot of other programs across Canada offer like forensic psychology, for example. There wasn't very many that offered like forensic chemistry, forensic biology, those types of things. And so that really piqued my interest in going to Trent University. I was also the kid in high school that literally like my friends would all be talking about going to the same university. And I was like, I'm okay to go far away. I want to go somewhere different. So it was one of those things like, just give it a try. Go try it. See if this is something you want to do. See if you're okay with being away from home. See what happens. And I'm really glad I did because obviously sitting there in classes really piqued my interest in forensic science even more. I think, and we know this, that like, sure, television shows give a decent picture of it, but when you actually are sitting there and learning it, you learn so much more. And I really got to understand that there is more than just DNA or fingerprints or all of those. There's all these different areas. And so that immediately was like, this is what I want to do.
Right. I know in one of our classes, one of our professors usually talks about this curve. I forget the name of this curve for some reason, but it's sort of like something to do with how our expectations of what the field of forensic science is is quite heightened because of the TV shows that we watch and so on, and then we decide to come to school because of that. And then once we come and see it for what it is, we tend to sort of go through a downward curve in terms of our interest in the field because it doesn't seem as cool, if you will. And then we pick back up again and we find our interest somewhere. Do you feel like you've experienced that curve at all? And if I can find this curve somewhere, I'll put a picture up of it. But anyway, have you felt that?
I definitely think that I did. I will say, like, my first year at Trent University was really hard for me. Probably a mix of being away from home, but also just, like, I think it was the shock of, like, literally the first month being there, and professors are telling us, like, it's not what you see on TV. And I was like, wait, I came here because of what I saw on TV.
Right.
So I think that shock did hit me, and I found it really hard. Thankfully, in my first year that I was there, I took a lot of core-based classes as well. So, like, I took, like, Introduction to Forensic Science and Introduction to Canadian Justice. And then Crime Scene Investigations or something like that. But a lot of the other ones were, like, math, sciences, those ones. So at least that kind of kept me going through my first year to know that I was doing other things as well.
Yeah.
But I think once I got to the end of my first year, it was kind of like, you know what? Like, I think I can stick with this.
Right.
There is lots of different areas, but it took time to get to that point. I do remember just hitting that, like, one standstill and being like, but I came here because of what they were showing on TV. Like, I want to be that cool person that's picking up DNA and carrying a gun on their hip. Like, that's what I wanted to do. But no, that's not how it works.
Right.
And that was a really big realization. To see that and know that a lot of the TV shows that are out there, as much as we love them, that's not how it actually is.
Right. Yeah.
And that was something that even now, being a forensic scientist and being in it, trying to explain that to even my friends or my family, like, I won't be doing that, okay? That won't be me. I'll be part of that, but, like, not all of that.
Right. So you won't be walking into a scene with a coffee cup in your hand.
Yeah, no.
Right.
And you can't solve, like, it's really hard to solve a case in a week. DNA doesn't get tested in that amount of time. Like, just, it's crazy now how you can educate people because of what you've learned.
For sure. And I think I mentioned this in the episode I recorded with Shelby, but there was this TV show. I don't know if it's on TV anymore. It's called CID in India. And it's funny, but it's sort of dumb at the same time. This guy in the forensics lab, essentially, when they bring in some white powder, tastes it and goes, oh, this is this powder, and it does this to you. Like, what?
That is such a no-no.
Exactly. You wouldn't be tasting any type of evidence. Yeah, so the fact...
No idea what that is. It could be poison.
Exactly. It could kill you. But no, just tap a bit of it, taste it, and you'll know what it is. Great. That's how forensics is done. No, it's not. But yeah, I think a lot of those dramatized versions of it can definitely add to the perception that people have, right? And I don't know if have you found any TV shows that do a good job of being close to what forensics actually are?
No, like, the only ones that I can think of is actual shows like Datelines or Forensic Files that are actually like going through the step-by-steps of an actual case.
Right.
I've gravitated towards either listening on podcasts to a lot of those or watching those because I can watch it and be like, oh yeah, this is realistic. I still like a lot of the other shows, like Criminal Minds will probably go down in history as one of my favorite shows.
Sure.
But it's hard for me to watch it now and not critique some of the things that they're doing in it. But that's where I would say is a lot more of those, like, Forensic Files, Datelines, the actual ones that are following an actual case and doing it that way. But that's really all I can think of.
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of shows that actually stick to the way it's done. I know they consult with a lot of these forensic scientists and officers and so on from the past. And I guess they add a little bit of the TV magic that I guess makes it watchable, right? Because on the flip side, I do think that if it wasn't as entertaining as it is, you wouldn't have as many eyeballs.
No.
So it makes sense that way. You mentioned something interesting earlier about wanting to go into or become a veterinarian, but then watching surgeries sort of was not your thing. But this is also kind of dark in some sense,
It
right?
is,
So what
yeah.
was that separation for you that made this okay and that made that not so okay?
To be honest, I don't really know. I don't know, like, this is going to sound so bad, but like, I have such a huge love for animals, especially pets. And so I don't know if it was the fact that, like, a lot of times in a vet's office, if something is going into surgery, it's like a life or death situation.
Right.
And you might have to sit there and tell a family that their pet's not coming home.
Yeah.
I think that was the same reason I didn't know if I could be a doctor,
Mm.
is the actual, like, having to sit there and tell them that.
Yeah.
I also, like, I struggle to see something in pain.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, blood doesn't bother me, but if I see you screaming in pain, that's going to make me feel sick.
Mm.
So some of that side of things,
Mm.
I still would love to be a veterinarian because of the fact of being able to help.
Right.
But it's some of those other sides. I knew, though, that I wanted to do a career where I was still helping in some sort of way.
Yeah.
I also like the logical or investigative aspect of forensic science.
Yeah.
And how you can use that to
Right.
help solve a crime. But at least in our in our area of forensic science, unless you were doing like pathology or something like that, you're probably not actually seeing the body as much.
Yeah.
So those were some of my factors that went into it. I just knew that I probably could not be the person that could sit there and walk up to a family and be like, I'm sorry. Like, I just knew that I couldn't, because I would be devastated inside too.
Yeah, because it's gut wrenching, right? To walk up to someone and be like, "Hey, I'm sorry, but your pet didn't make it through," or your, I don't know, child,
Yeah.
partner, whatever it may be, X and Y happened,
Yeah.
and yeah. So it's in some sense a huge testament to the fact that there are people who are able to do it and they're doing great work. Because
Yeah.
I mean, again, it's easy for us to say because we don't know what they're going through, but on the outside, it's definitely a tough job, and I mean, major kudos to them for doing that.
Yeah, 100%. That's why, like, a few years ago, I was looking at going to med school, and
Yeah.
I was like, if I am, it's just for pathology. Like,
Right.
I didn't think I could do anything else. I always thought it'd be really cool to do autopsies and get to do all that kind of stuff, but that wasn't in the cards for me at the time. And so I came down here, which has been the better option for me, which I knew. But yeah, I just don't think I'd be able to do that part of it. That was probably the hardest part of being in the vet office. Like, I could go in on appointments and help give needles and fill needles and do all of that. That was fine.
Yeah.
But it was the actual on the surgery table or those sides of things that was really hard for me.
Right. Right. That makes sense. And it's funny you mentioned pathology because in thought standard, I was also like, oh, maybe I'll do forensic pathology, and that was sort of something I was talking about actively. But then I just realized that I did not like biology as much, and I preferred chemistry over biology. And this is something that I've been coming to a bit of a realization. Maybe it doesn't apply to everybody, but I sense that it applies in some cases for some people. So I'd like to explore this a little further. There's, or sometimes, be it academically or career wise, we're inclined to make a decision in terms of knowing what we don't like and sort of going through a process of selecting things that we think might be better because we don't want to do the things we don't like. But then there are other people also that take things that they like to do and they move forward with that. But have you sort of observed that in any way happening to you?
Oh yeah, definitely. In my 7 years of doing forensic science, I have probably been up and down the map of what I wanted to do in forensic science.
Oh yeah, just as you say that, I remember our conversations about the study and stuff, but I'll let you go ahead. Yeah.
I think when I first went into it, I just wanted to be a crime scene investigator.
Right.
I wanted to go to the crime scene, collect the evidence, get to do that fun stuff. I think I went through a point in time where I thought being a fingerprint analyst would be cool as well. But as I focused a lot more on those, I missed the biology aspect. Towards my last few years at Trent University, I was either focusing in on wildlife forensics. So for people that may not know that, that is like poaching or illegal animal trafficking, those types of things. Just because I grew up with such a love for animals as well, I was like, this would be cool to branch the two of them. But my undergraduate degree was forensic science and biology. So I was also in all of these like histology, pathology-based classes as well. And I found a love for, tissues and doing that kind of stuff. And so kind of at that time came the idea of, well, maybe I should look at going to med school. So really, when I graduated in December of 2021, it was like, I'm going to try med school. I think pathology would be interesting. But on the backbone, if I don't, I'm going to do wildlife. Okay. None of that happened. I, not gonna lie, like struggled when I graduated in December of 2021 to even find jobs in Canada. A lot of them, even for conservation jobs, wanted me to go do a 2-year conservation like college program. I was like, more school? Do I have to? There was a lot of different things like that. I eventually I'm just going to apply to some police departments. I'm going to go work as a police officer. Probably not use my forensics training for a little bit, but that was kind of what I thought was just in the cards for me at the time. And then came the thought of, what about masters? Is that something that I want to do? My dad started doing some searching. I applied to a few different places, UCO being one of them. And really this idea came up because a lot of police departments that I applied to were like, you've just done 4.5 years of forensic science degree. Like a lot of them weren't like, we're not telling you what to do, but we think you should go do more schooling. And it was like, I don't want to do more schooling though. Just hire me. Like, please. I just want a job.
I want to work. Why can't you give me a job?
Literally. So I got into UCO and I still had this whole idea of pathology in the back of my mind or wildlife forensics.
Sure.
So when I applied, I originally was in the general program and I knew I liked biology, but pathology at the time was not fitting into the biology section. And so they just felt that it would be best if I did general. But there was some persuading by a few different professors. And with my background being already forensic science and biology, they felt that I was, in a sense, like taking the short road by doing just the general track. Like they were like, you have all this biology side already. Like, why don't you continue it? I think they felt like I had the option to do more and I wasn't picking it just because I wanted to stay safe with pathology. Really glad that they decided to put me to that side because it really did open a lot of doors to things that I did not know were a part of forensic science. And I came down here and within like a month of being down here, basically like wildlife and pathology were out the window for me. And I mean, I knew DNA was a huge aspect. I didn't know if it was something that I wanted to do, but I became very interested in it. And then obviously microbial forensics, which I knew a bit about, but not a ton. So that was something that really opened my eyes a lot as well. But I don't think if I wouldn't have come down here or if they wouldn't have said, you should really do the biology track, that I would realize that those were two options for me. And honestly, now more than ever, I probably am leaning more to the microbial side of things than actual DNA. But it's still, all of it is so interesting to me and something that I had never really sat down to look at before. So it is crazy how over the years, just everything that I've wanted to do has changed and changed and changed. But that just, I mean, in a sense, just allows you to see that there is so many different areas, and they are so unique in their own way. Yeah, it's really interesting.
No, absolutely. I have two sort of offshooting questions that are maybe on different ends of the spectrum. Firstly, can you elaborate a little further on what microbial forensics is for people who might not know what that is? And secondly, and this is maybe coming more from a cultural background that I have, where when you sort of talked about how you've gotten to know what you want to do more and your interest by like choosing and picking different things and sort of realizing what works and what doesn't. Maybe I'm wrong in having this belief, so I'll admit that if I'm out upfront before I even ask this question. Culturally, I feel like there's this burden of like picking what you need to do at the age of 18, and that's what you kind of stick through. And maybe I'm wrong in saying that because everybody has sort of evolved into their own thing at some point later on. But then I feel like there is that sort of cloud that looms over you of like, you pick this is going to be the final decision and you have to stick through it. Is that something that you experienced as well initially? So those are the two questions. You can tackle whichever one you want first.
I'll tackle what is microbial forensics first. So microbial forensics is literally like the investigation of microbes. So what I mean by that is pathogens or diseases that are out in our environment, but we're looking at it from an intentionally set side of things. So on one hand, we have what is epidemiology, which is looking at the natural spread of pathogens in the environment and the sicknesses that it causes. Microbial forensics is looking at intentionally set. So we're talking about biocrime, bioterrorism, all of those types of things. So looking at investigating if something was put out into the environment, we want to know, what is it? How is it spreading? How fast is it spreading? Who said it? Where can we trace it back to? So that's really what microbial forensics is looking at, is more of that intentionally set side of things, or like laboratory accidents. But for example, I mean, our generation might not know this as much, but like the older generation probably would, but like the Amerithrax case of 2001, when letters of anthrax were sent out to government officials.
Right.
That's really when microbial forensics started, was looking at, hey, we have this pathogen or, that's being sent out. We need to track where this is coming from so we can find who did it to stop it, because it is a crime.
Right.
It's being used to harm or kill people. So we need to find a way to stop that. So that's really where microbial forensics came up. So it is quite recent compared to a lot of other disciplines.
Yeah.
So that kind of covers that question. To answer your next question, definitely. I think that we definitely live in a world where you're supposed to know what you want to do when you're 18. And if you don't, or if you try something and you want to back out and try something new, it's not always looked at in the best way.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times I could count in my first year that I was like, I don't think forensic science is for me. I think also like the fact that I went so far away was influencing my decision on that a lot.
And this is when you were doing your undergrad, correct?
Yeah. But I actually made the choice after my first semester to do a double major of forensic science and biology, because I knew deep down I liked forensic science. I just wasn't loving it right now. But I was like, if I also get a degree in biology, I can go work in a lab somewhere.
Right.
I wanted to have something else to fall back on if I decided not to. But I think as we get older, we change, and what we like to do changes. I literally had no idea until like November of my grade 12 year that I even wanted to do forensic science. For as long as I can remember, I wanted to be a veterinarian. My middle sister, she wanted to be a teacher her entire life. I think she did like one semester of teaching and decided, I want to go be a coach instead and do like sports management. I think getting out of high school and getting into a new environment and just figuring out where you fit into the world, because for so long you've just been in this high school bubble.
Yeah.
Your brain is still developing and figuring out what it wants to do. Like, I obviously have stuck with forensic science, but like there is still days where I'm like, I wonder if I would have went and done this, where I would be right now.
Yeah.
And even this whole path of all the different areas of forensic science, like I look at it now and I'm like, I'm glad I didn't go to med school.
Yeah.
Because I like where I end up, and I found a different area of forensics that I'm loving a lot more. Those are just learning steps that we have to take. And it's even one of those things that I'm like 25 and I'm like, you know what? I'm totally fine that I'm still in school.
Right.
Like, and everybody's at a different spot where you've known from the time you were 5 years old what you wanted to do, or you didn't know till 2 years ago what you absolutely wanted to do. And I think that that's totally fine. Like, and that has to be accepted. Like, people are just changing.
Right. Absolutely. I think we realize that in our own lives, but for some reason, I guess because we're just hypocrites in nature, generally speaking, we sort of set these external expectations of people that they shouldn't be doing such things and so on. Some of it comes from a place of being a hypocrite. I guess some of it also comes from a place of making sure that, I guess in the case of our parents versus their kids, they don't want you to fall into traps that they fell into, so they want you to sort of secure yourself and all that. So I don't necessarily have or hold anything against like our parents' generation that way, but I do notice that to be kind of a trend in some way about the way that we see those things. Another very tangential question rather. What was it like growing up in a farm?
Oh, I loved it. It was one of my favorite things. I didn't really know what it was like to be in the city until I was like 15 years old. But if I could go back to that 15-year-old and be like, just stay on the farm, I would have said it. I learned a whole lot growing up on a farm. And I'm not saying I wouldn't have in a city, but it made me who I am. I learned hard work at a very young age. And just a love for being outside, for just animals and people and getting to do that. I, in a heartbeat, would be living on a farm right now if I could. I cannot afford that right now, but I loved it. The not having to deal with like the bustle of the city or traffic or anything like that. Like, in a sense, you're kind of in your own little oasis.
Right.
At least that's how it felt for my parents' farm. I loved that place. Like, it was just us out there.
Yeah.
You just got to be like so carefree. I mean, my sisters and I would go like roll in the mud, and we'd be sitting out there riding cows' backs. Like, those are the things that we were doing on a Tuesday evening. You know what I mean? Like, I look back at that and I was like, it was such a fun way to grow up.
Right.
I loved that. And I am still very thankful for the fact that we did get to move into the city. I know it was a hard decision for my parents to make, but they were doing a decision that they felt was best for the family.
Sure.
So we kept our cows, but we sold the farm, moved into the city. Somebody was leasing them out for us. So I went from living 15 years on a farm to all of a sudden living in town.
Yeah.
That like hits you like a brick. It's like,
I'm sure.
okay, wow, this is very different.
Yeah.
But it was a good perspective that I think my sisters and I needed as well. And I'm really grateful for the opportunities that it brought up. Not only did we move to the city, but we started going to a bigger school that offered more diverse classes. I went from a school that would have had a graduating size of 11 to a school that had a graduating size of 170.
Right.
There's just those differences. My sisters and I also played a lot of sports, so more opportunities in that area of things. And it was huge, like, for all three of us, it did offer a lot more opportunities that I'm incredibly grateful for as well. But I always liked to say this to people. If we could have just taken my parents' farm, picked it up, and moved it close to that city, that's what I would have done, because
that'd be ideal case scenario. Yeah.
I loved being on the farm, but I also fell in love with the school and the people there and just like the environment and the opportunities. But I wish I could have combined them all. Yeah.
You mentioned that you learned some things from the farm, hard work being one of those. What are some things that you think, other than the hard work aspect of it, that are serving you well now?
I think definitely like communication. There's a lot of that on a farm. Obviously the hard work. I have to think.
That's okay. Take your time.
I think it's just embracing challenges too. There's always something on the farm. Every day is a new day.
Right.
And every day is going to bring up something different. And I feel like in the field of forensic science, that is very much what it is.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what made me appreciate it so much, and why I am a person that likes just about everything, because not every day is going to be the same day.
Yeah.
And I love that, because I love trying new things or solving a new problem. It overall just makes you a more diverse person.
Yeah.
It also just opens your abilities for more as well. And I feel like the farm really brought that about. There's a lot of other things that the farm has helped me with as well. Like I said, communication, but obviously just like a love for what you're doing. Like not just because like, oh, I get to be here every day, but like loving the intricate parts of it. Like I loved getting to watch the baby calves be born in the spring and getting to make hay in the summertime. Like there's just little things that you just fall in love with. And I feel like in a sense, it gave me a more appreciation for different things in life. For the little things, the fun, exciting things, those types of things. And I think a lot of it too, like between like my sisters and my parents, like it was the five of us there. And so that's yours.
Yeah.
There was really nobody else. It was just the five of us. And so you learn to work as a family and figure out, you know, who's better at this and who's better at this, and combining that to make it all work together. And I think that really helped me to find what skills I'm good at in life and where areas that I might need help in, and where somebody can come in to help with that type of thing. And I think that that's really important, because there isn't very many jobs nowadays where it's just a one-person job.
Yeah. You need support. You need a support system around you.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Has anybody asked you any dumb questions about growing up on a farm? I don't know why that was a thought that came to my mind, but like I guess when you've moved from a farm to living in a city, like Or not dumb questions, but maybe dumb assumptions rather.
Right. I don't know. I can't really think off the top of my head,
That's
but
okay.
I honestly think more than anything, like, some people just thought, like, it was so crazy that, like, my sisters and I were so involved in the farm. Like, I, probably from the time I was like 8 years old or even younger, was like out doing chores with my dad all the time.
Yeah.
Like, I knew how to check cows. Like, I knew how to do that kind of stuff. And I think to some people it was like, wow, like, you're this young, you're doing that already. I think also, like, for being completely honest, like, it was also 3 girls. I think a lot of times we look at that as like the boy would be outside doing that. Well, we didn't have that in my family.
Yeah.
It was 3 girls. And like, we weren't afraid to just get out and do it.
Yeah.
I mean, we had a ton of fun. Like, that's really what it was. And we didn't care to get dirty or
Right.
shoot a gun. Like, we were doing all that kind of stuff. It was just, it was fun.
It was the culture, it was the way you were brought up, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think, like, I can't really think of any, like, dumb assumptions, but I think a lot of people were maybe surprised by that side of things.
Gotcha.
I grew up also with a lot of people that obviously, like, had some sort of, like, farm background, but also when you go to the city, that's a lot different too. Like, there's some people who haven't even stepped foot out to that side of things.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was something that always stayed with me.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool. That's probably a stupid question. How do you make hay?
How do you make hay?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, it can be different in some places, but usually you'll just have, like, a field of grass, and this can be, most of the time it's planted grass.
Okay.
So,
like a specific type of grass?
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't ask me which kind.
Okay, that's okay.
Most of the times you'll leave, like, natural grass fields to graze your cows throughout the summer. And a lot of times you don't really want to cut those because natural grass fields haven't been, in a sense, worked up. So you don't know where the rocks are or the things that could wreck your equipment. So a lot of times it's going to be planted grass fields. And we have what's called a haybine. And so the one that we had was behind the tractor. And so it just goes and it's basically like a big saw and it just cuts it off, but it leaves it in lines. So just down the field. And then we have what is called a rake. And so it's not just a little rake, but like a big rake.
Like a machine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it hooks up behind the tractor and it just goes along and it takes 2 rows that have been cut and flips them over and brings them together. So one, it helps to dry because you don't want to bale the hay until it's fully dry, because if you leave some moisture in it, it's going to rot. But it also brings 2 swaths together to make sure that, like, you're getting a full enough bale. And then once it's all dry, you hook the baler up to the back of the tractor. And depending on what kind of bale you want, because you can do square bales, big or small, or you can do different size of round bales.
And bale is essentially like all this hay that's been cut up combined.
Yes.
Right.
And so it's just going to go down one of those strips and it just takes it in and it'll alert you. It'll give a beep when it's ready and it'll just dump it out the back and then you keep going, but it wraps it up itself. That's the new generation of farmers' way of making hay.
Sure.
Like, back in the day, I think a lot of it was you were pitchforking it into the back of a cart and hauling it to your barn. Like,
a lot more manual labor.
Yes. That was how we did it. I grew up on a farm, but did not learn to start driving a tractor until 2020. With on the farm for my parents and us girls, us girls weren't old enough yet to drive a tractor.
Right.
But just because of the steps and my parents only having one tractor, it was easier for just one person to do it. So that was usually my mom or my dad. But 2 summers ago, so for the summer of 2020 and 2021, I worked on my dad's brother's farm, so my aunt and uncle's farm. And I got to rake during those 2 summers. And it's just really fun. It's really cool. I really liked it. There's just something about working on the farm that I love, probably because it was ingrained in me.
Right.
And yeah, so that's usually the process.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. Sorry, I was smiling there because I had a couple of questions come up in my head, and I was like, is this like my city boy moment where I don't know jack shit about how a farm works? Because I was going to ask you, like, if cows graze on like regular grass, they also graze on hay, right? Or do they not?
Yes. So hay is just a fancy term for dried grass.
Right.
Yes. So technically, yes, they are. But for us in good old Saskatchewan, it gets cold in the winter.
Right.
And lots of snow. So we will usually graze them from probably like April 1st till like November 1st-ish, where like there's not really a lot of frost yet. Everything's still good. There's no snow on the ground. It's not too cold.
Yeah.
And then from basically like November 1st till April 1st is when they'll be fed hay. And a lot of that is, we had, at least on our farm, a shredder. So you would put the bale into it and it would grind it up and spit it out for the cows and lay it on top of the snow so that they could get to it. Growing up for us, we usually had about like 100 to 150 cows at a time.
It's a lot of cows.
It is.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, my dad would shred about 4 to 5 bales every day to feed them in the winter. You want to keep them warm. And so another thing that you're going to do is you're probably going to try and shred it not as far away, but far away from the water to make sure that they're walking to go get water and staying active and doing all of that too, because we do get quite cold. And then you're also going to put up shelters for them.
Right, so that they can stay warm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's usually the process.
Gotcha. You can, if you can't talk much about this, it's okay, but I was just curious, like, were you all farming for milk, or was it for milk and meat, or both?
We were all meat at my farm, so beef is what we had only. We would get a couple milk cows, but that was usually to feed calves who had either lost their moms or were twins.
Oh, okay.
But that was really it. Cows are kind of interesting creatures where if they like lose their own calf, or if, for example, with a milk cow, they just have a lot of milk.
Right.
I mean, it still is a process. You have to work on it a little bit, but you can draft a calf onto them. It's basically like they're adopting somebody else's calf. And so we used to do that growing up, where instead of fooling around trying to get another cow, you would just get a milk cow that made sure that had a lot of milk so that they could take some calves.
Right. And they could feed multiple calves.
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting. This might be a dark question, maybe not. You mentioned sort of how growing up in a farm helped you bond with animals. But I guess for you growing up, did that ever affect, or knowing that they were being brought up for meat, did that ever affect your relationship in any way with animals, or did you understand it?
I think it didn't bug me because I understood it. It was one of those things that, like, sure, like, in a sense, those cows were like pets, but they weren't at the same time either. Sure. My parents were also pretty good at, like, anything that we had named, they usually made sure didn't end up on our dinner table. A lot of the times that's how it was. But I also grew up knowing that cows weren't dogs. Like, they weren't a pet in that way.
I see. Okay.
They were in the food industry for a reason, and that's what we were raising them to be.
Yeah.
But like, it was still hard. Like, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
This was literally like 2 years ago, I think. So maybe like the fall of 2021. So maybe 3 years ago, like, one of my hands down favorite cows that I've ever had, her name was Georgia. I was 22 years old, and I bawled like a baby when it was her time to go. She was old, and that's what it was. I think another thing, like, I got attached to the cows, like the mother cows, because they were always around. Lots of times we didn't keep their calves. So you didn't, like, the calves would only be around for like 6-7 months. You don't become as attached to them because they're going to be sold. But the moms I always got attached to. I have names for a lot of them. But yeah, it's always been a tough process. Like, you're around them all the time.
Yeah.
Like, you get used to them. And out of my sisters and I, me especially, like, the cows were my everything. They still are.
Yeah.
I always found it so hard, anytime, for any reason. Even if you knew that they had been around for 15 years and that they were getting old and it was better for them to go, that still sucked.
Yeah.
But in a sense, the cows for us was like a job. They're there, you're making income off of them.
Yeah.
That's what they're there for. It also offered some comfort knowing that they were going to feed the world.
Yes.
That's what they were there to be for. So as much as it sucked, it was something that needed to be done as well.
Right.
But yeah.
I guess I'm trying to formulate this next question in my head a little, because it's a combination of thoughts. Let me ask you this. Firstly, like, what is the general age of a cow, like, in terms of from the time that you've sort of farming them to the time that they end up on someone's table? Like, is that...
So, basically, I'll start here. For us, anyway, when we still had the farm, a mom would have her calf, and it's usually weaned, let's go like 6-7 months later, maybe. That might be a little bit long.
What is weaned? Doesn't sell them?
Taken off their moms. So taken away from their moms.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
And then from there, usually anything that was a female was usually kept. So either to go back into the herd to make more babies, or if they were smaller, or maybe just weren't the right fit, they would go to an auction mart. But most times, unless there's something wrong with the female, they will go back into somebody's herd. Males, on the other hand, unless you're keeping them for a bull to be for breeding, they're going to become what is a steer. And those are going to be a lot of your meat producing, like your good cut meats. Like, I'm talking your steaks, your roast, those. I would say usually from about 1.5 to 2 years is probably when they're best for butchering.
2 years from the time they've been born, essentially.
I would say about that. I'm like, it'll vary.
Sure.
But for us, like, I was in 4-H, so I showed cattle. Usually by time we showed and they went to the butchering mart, they were about 1.5 old. So it really just depends, because you don't want them to get like too big or too old. That's when the meat starts to get a little bit interesting. But you also don't want them too young. Like, you want to get to a point where they have good muscle, because that's going to be your best cuts of meat.
So that's sort of like that sweet spot is 1.5 to 2 years.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Because I like to say, like, your your cows or your older cows for sure, and anything that's been kept as a bull, those become your hamburger animals because their meat at that time just isn't the same, if that makes sense. You definitely want your younger animals are going to produce your better cuts of meat. So it really just depends on what you're looking for.
And I'm guessing you all had different breeds, or was it the same breed?
We pretty much had the entire same breed. So my parents basically had Black Angus cattle.
Okay.
But we mixed a little bit of Simmental in there, which is more of a, I like to say like Angus are a little bit more like, maybe more like petite. That's kind of maybe not the right word, but like, just like slimmer in a sense, whereas Simmental brings in some more of that muscle. And so we were kind of combining both.
Like crossbreeding them?
Yeah. Some of our cows were already that way, but that's really what we had then and what we have now. Because you want good muscular calves. Like you want good calves that are going to go for money for beef production. So usually right now, if a calf leaves our farm, a steer calf, when it's like 6 or 7 months old, it's going to go to a feedlot to be fed to a certain age or to a certain weight, and then it's going to go to be butchered. A female is probably going to go to an auction mart to go to somebody else's farm and be raised for a cow. That's really what it is. So yeah.
So essentially it's the males that often are the ones that end up more so on a table, and the females are
for the most
part birth and sort of
you want
which I mean makes sense.
You're going to keep your females going to make sure that you're bringing in more calves, and your males are going to go to the auction mart. Most of the time too, your males bring you in more money too because of what they're going for.
Interesting. How does that fluctuate? Like, does it fluctuate?
It does. It'll go like, calf prices are always going up and down no matter what, but it's a price per pound. I don't know what it is right now, but usually your males are going to bring in a little bit more. One, they usually weigh more. So that's going to be a factor in it too. But also they're going for meat, so that'll influence what their pricing is on that as well.
Gotcha. Fascinating. I mean, I don't know. Some of this is just intriguing because, I mean, firstly, I mean, as a Hindu, we don't eat cows. So I guess there's that external curiosity of how that works. Secondly, never grew up in a farm, so wouldn't know how some of this worked. So thank you for explaining that.
I love talking about it. So
awesome. I've heard something, and you can tell me if this is true or not. I've heard people say, like, cows experience emotion. They talk about like even cows crying and so on and so forth. Have you sort of sensed that or experienced that?
Yes, cows can show signs of like distress, or maybe if you want to say like sadness in a sense, if they like lose their calf or if their calf gets taken away from them. Like growing up, I hated the fall roundup and when calves were weaned off their moms, because
is that what it's called, a fall roundup?
Yeah, that's what we called it.
So essentially like taking the cow during the fall months is when you take the calves away from the
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
And I used to hate it living on the farm because those cows would just like, we call it like bellowing or mooing all night long, but it's like crying for their calves all night long. Like they just want their calves back.
Are they walking around or like making sounds?
Walking around, they'll usually like come right up to the last spot that they were at with their calf, like looking for them. They'll be bellowing, like just wanting, like, where's my baby? I want my baby type of thing. So that is definitely where I would go with that side of it. Yeah.
Okay. Now we're going to jump completely into a tangential different side of things, because that's how my head is sort of bouncing around with questions, I guess. You mentioned something interesting earlier about how, you wanted to work in a field that helped and was in a way of service to people.
Yeah.
I've had this thought recently, so maybe it's a little undercooked, but I feel like every industry or every job you do is helping people in a way.
It is. Yeah. Now that I thought about it in my mind, I'm like, yeah, technically it is. Yeah.
Which, I mean, no, that's okay. Like, it's not like, I guess my point is that it's okay to do things that can help and better serve people, right? Absolutely. That I think is the highest form of service in a way, is to be able to serve the people you grow up with, or whatever it may be, like your fellow humans, if you will. But I think we sort of mentioned that, right? Like, I want to do a job that helps people, and it was like just a weird realization the other day. It's like, but doesn't every job help people?
Yeah, when you actually sit down and really evaluate it, it's like, yeah, I guess they all do, really.
Yeah.
Every job in the world in some way, shape, or form
Right.
is helping people.
Indirectly or directly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Literally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. And that was just a thought that crept up. I was like, okay, I guess we could explore it. Because I think that is one of the major reasons for why people nowadays, or it's a huge motivator nowadays, I think, in terms of how people choose what they want to do, right? Because they want to be able to help, and they want to be able to help in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that people think about more today. Well,
Yeah.
again, I can't speak for my parents' generation, but I don't know if they thought about it as much back
for
then,
sure.
Versus doing it now, or versus how much we think about it now. Because, and again, not for right or for wrong, but I think back in the day, a lot of the thought was do jobs that pay you more, because that's financial security, which is a better life. And now I think people are. I guess there's also money in other fields, so people are able to make jumps to do other stuff.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, not necessarily. I think obviously in our world today, and I won't go into this too much, but
Sure.
With the price of a lot of things, I think that is also something that's in the back of a lot of people's minds too when it comes to getting a job. But I think in a sense, you're right, I think we do live in a world now that is better at being go do what you want to do as well. Right. Do what's best for you. I think there is a lot more of the outlook of you need to be happy with what you're doing, not just doing something that you're doing.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of funny that we are talking about this because it was actually a conversation we had a few weeks ago, actually, in my church Bible study. But I think that that's also hard today because we're told, do what you love to do.
Yeah.
But what if you love to do doesn't get you through your bills that you have to pay?
Yeah.
And that's one of the hardest things to wrap our heads around.
Yeah.
But I mean, each to their own, and who thinks in that way. Yeah. I'm not going to lie, it's probably something that is in the back of my mind.
Sure.
Because a lot of it is staying down here, if I choose to stay down here, finding a job that can help me stay down here. Yeah. But also doing something that I love to do is a huge factor too. So you got to be happy with what you're doing because eventually you're probably going to hate it.
Yeah.
And I read something the other day that said, it's crazy how if you go back 20 years ago, most the average person at most in a span of working 40 years would maybe work 2 jobs. In today's day and age, somebody working 40 years will have 7 or more jobs.
Wow, that's fascinating.
And it could be in the same field.
Yeah.
But nowadays we have a lot of people that And maybe it's because we have a society that's more accepting or is more open to be like, if you're not happy there, it's okay to leave and go to something else. Or is it that people just don't know what they want to do? Or, there's a lot of things that made me, when I saw that was like, this is really interesting, because that is so true.
Yeah.
Of people are jumping jobs a lot. And is it because as a society we're like, hey, like, it's okay if you're not happy with where you're at, you should go do something else instead of like still being in something that you're not? Or is it that people are just like, I just want to go do something else?
Yeah.
And it could be probably is both, honestly, but it is really interesting.
For sure. And again, if you're not comfortable exploring what I'm about to ask next, that's completely fine. Since you're a person of faith, I'd like to just sort of explore this a little further. When we talk about work and things and so on, I think something that we tend to think about is, oh, we should do what makes us happy, or like we think of monetary benefit versus our own personal happiness and so on. Now that I'm saying this, maybe this is not a faith question. Anyway, sorry, I'm just thinking out loud.
Okay.
In terms of, I guess, sticking to a job versus hopping around, there's always multiple different, I guess, schools of thought that talk about, okay, the grass is greener on the other side versus the grass is greener where you water it.
Yes.
There's a lot of nuance there. And again, like I think depending on your situation, one or the other can be true, right? Like if you're trying to water a patch of grass that is rotting, then you're maybe not going to get anywhere. You might have to move to different pastures. But at the same time, I think you also have to realize that just because that patch of grass looks shinier
doesn't mean it's going to be better.
Exactly. So how do you think for you, like, your faith helps you navigate that when you're entering this phase of life of figuring out work and future?
Oh, to be honest, I don't know. Like, I honestly am like, that's tough, because I feel like, and I don't want to say it about like this day and age of people, I could just be saying it about myself, but like sometimes when things get hard, we think it's just easier to go away from it and go to something else.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times that's the first resort that we think of.
True.
A lot of the times.
Yeah.
And I know I've been a big person in that. I think, though, you have to allow yourself some time to think about it and make sure that you're not just making a rash decision to make a rash decision.
Right.
Because, like you said, you don't know if it's better on the other side.
Yeah.
I think that takes a lot of time to think. Maybe even just sitting down and talking with somebody. Like, I think it's something that you have to really sit down and be like, is this the right decision for me?
Yeah.
And that can take time.
Yeah.
I think that that's one thing that even for myself, like, I've had a lot of times over the last few years where it's like, okay, do you just stick with something or do you not? And actually, to kind of give an example, when I first came here, I had no idea what actually went into making a thesis. And I kind of just was given this first idea and I was like, okay, cool, let's go with it. Sure, why not? And I get like 9 months into doing it and I'm like, I'm not sure if I love this.
Yeah.
When I took it to my thesis advisor, his first response to me was, is this the first time you've thought of this? Because if you're just thinking of this now, that it's getting hard and I don't like this, I want you to sit on it a little bit. I'm really glad he did, because I did need to sit down on it. I had been thinking about it for a little bit, but it was one of those things of, am I just making this decision because this one thing came up and I don't like this about this project and now I just think that it's done? Or is it that I think I could do something better? Eventually I did go and do something better, but I had to sit down and think about it because, again, this is 9 months of work that you're just deciding to throw out the window.
Right.
You really have to make sure that whatever you're going to next, and in my case, it was doing a whole new project, is going to be the better option.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad I sat down to think about it because there was a lot of weighing the pros and the cons.
Right.
But if I hadn't that day, or if my thesis advisor had said that day, oh, it's fine, I probably wouldn't have sat down and evaluated that and actually looked at like, okay, there could be some positives to this one. So I think that's something that you really have to do.
Yeah.
And if we want to go to the faith side of it, I think it's something to pray about.
Yeah.
I know that that's been something that I've tried to get better at over the last little bit. God has a plan, and whatever that is. And God will reveal that to you in some way, but it also isn't going to be just like, if God is revealing something to you, he's not going to leave it fuzzy. And so if it's left like fuzzy, you're probably wanting to think about that a little bit. That's like where my mind would go with that. But yeah, that's kind of where I would go.
So I have like a very convoluted thought that I'm trying to dilute. In terms of our faith, and like, we believe in different faiths, but I think generally, I guess just based on what you said, like, you believe that God has a plan and that, things will happen for the best, or things happen for a reason, and so on and so forth. This is something that I've been thinking about lately, which is why I'm asking it. So if it's boring, you can just shoot this down. But I think to some extent, while we do realize that God has a plan for us, I think sometimes we might struggle with the idea of accepting his plan.
Oh, yeah.
Because we want something desperately that we think that is the best thing for us, but we struggle to let go and accept that that might not be the best thing for us. So I think you reach a point where you're like, okay, I guess God has a better plan for me. Sure, I'll go along. But I think there is a huge difference between knowing that God has a plan for you, believing that God has a plan for you, and accepting that God has a plan for you and that is the plan for you. Have you thought about this, or like, how do you navigate this?
I don't even know, because I struggle with that. Like, deep down, I do know that like God has a plan for me, and like I've seen it.
I'm just feeling very chilly all of a sudden. Yeah.
And I've seen it, like I have seen it unfold in my life, and some of those things I've been able to accept in a lot of ways. But, and I would say that I believe that that is the case.
Right.
But I think as humans, it is sometimes so hard for us to accept or believe when we don't know when it's coming.
Yeah.
Or we want to try and do it on our own.
Yeah.
I think like one version of that is, and like I won't go into this too much, but I think I can look at some of my friends who are getting married or about to have babies and be like, well, I'm 25. What about me?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it's like, Kate, chop, chop, need to get going. But it's like, Kate, no, like, God must have a plan for me right now as to why I'm not, or why I haven't met that person yet.
Yeah.
I just got to trust that, like, God has a timeline for each person, or like
Right.
God's got a plan for each person. And like, my plan is not going to be the same as this person's. But sometimes it's so hard to sit there and be like, no, like, I just want to force something right now. Like, I just want to make something happen right now. Like, and I think that gets to be the hardest part, because we as humans, we see all the things going on around us. Yeah. And are like, well, why isn't that happening in my life? How can I make that happen in my life? And I think that's where it gets tough. It's the same thing with like people getting jobs. Yeah. Like, why did that person get that? How can I make that happen? Yeah. I like to say that it all works out the way it's meant to. Yeah. If you would have asked me, like, let's go a year before I moved down here, I would have never guessed that I would have been moving down here, or that I would have even gotten accepted down here. Right. I was so convinced that I was just going to find a job and stay back home, and it was going to be fine. I was going to be happy. It was going to be good. Yeah. I'm so happy it worked the way that it did. I didn't realize how much I needed to come down here and how great it has been. But if I could have heard people say to me, I think you should go for more schooling, and went, no, I don't want to do that. But there was something that was like, I just got to go do that. Yeah. I think I got to go do that. And like, yeah, that was probably me and some of the people in my life too. But like, I'm a firm believer that like, if God didn't bring that into my life, or have somebody say that I would have never thought about that. I also think like there was a big reason why I came here. Like I could have picked some of the other schools that I went to, but there was a reason I needed to come to UCO. Like I really feel that way. But it is so hard to accept it. It really, really is. As much as you want to, it can be so hard to accept the plan that God has in your life and the timing of when it's coming. Yeah. Yeah.
There's that saying, right, of like, comparison is a thief of joy. Would you say that's the biggest hurdle for you to accept? For you to be able to accept God's plan?
Probably. I would think so. I think as humans, that's what we have done in life, is we compare. Oh, this person's got this better than me and this better than me. I want all of that. How do I get all of that? Right. That is a huge thing. Yeah. And I'll tell you one thing, like, I don't want to get into this conversation, but like, social media is terrible. You see all this stuff and you're like, no, it doesn't help at all. Yeah. But that's 100% what it is, because instead of just being like happy with where we're at in our lives, we see all this stuff around us and we're like, I want that. Yeah. I want that right now, or I need this right now. I want my life to look like that. We can never just be content with where we are. And that is huge in taking away our joy.
Yeah, because I think like our ego plays a huge role, right? In terms of this comparison of where we are versus where someone else is, how many kids one might have versus where we are, or someone's relationship status versus where we are, and so on and so forth. Our ego tends to always like kick in and be like, oh, that shiny new object is what I want. Yeah. But maybe it's not for us, and I think in some sense we have to work to train our ego in a way.
Exactly. It was really interesting when I went home for those 2 weeks. I ran into a friend of mine that I probably haven't seen in like 4 years, and she said something to me along the lines of, your life down there just looks amazing. You look like you're living your best life and having the greatest time. And the whole time she's saying that, and I'm thinking, like, you're about to get married. I want that in my life.
Yeah.
Like, we can never just be happy with what
we have.
Yeah. And it very much is like, it is that ego thing. She's sitting here saying to me, like, your life looks amazing. I absolutely love your life down there. And I'm sitting here going, like, well, I want your life right now in parts and ways. Like, don't get me wrong. I do love my life down here. But it's like, gosh, I want to be 25-year-old you and about to get married and has their dream job and is doing all of this. And but no, that's not in the cards for me right now. And that's something that can be so hard to accept.
Yeah. And I guess you realize a lot of these subtleties as you grow older, right? Because, 15 years back, you were carefree playing on a farm, right?
Yeah.
15 years later, these are all the thoughts you have, and you're like, I don't know, at least I think of it this way. Like, what has life come to?
Yes.
But then again, like, that is the point of growing older, right?
Yes.
Is to sort of figure all of these things out and sort of take your life in a direction that fulfills you.
Yeah.
But I guess also in some sense is the direction that God wants you to take.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
100%.
This other idea that I've sort of battled is probably not the right word, but sort of thought about is our effort versus God's plan. Because sometimes I think there can also be complacency that can come with assuming that, okay, God probably has something for me, and maybe not working as hard enough towards it. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, I think so a little bit. I really do agree with what you said, because I feel like I found myself probably more in the last year going into something and being like, am I just putting effort into this because it's what I want in my life? Or is it something that God wants in my life? And it's allowed me to sit down and like evaluate that a lot more. And I think a lot of that comes with like even just day-to-day activities or school, but even relationships with people.
Yeah.
I think more and more I've realized this in the last little bit, that like there are just some things that are meant to be in your life for a certain amount of time, and you can try and put in so much effort and try, but I think you'll hit that point when you're like, I think I'm just putting in this effort because it's what I want and it's not what God wants in my life. I haven't had a ton of circumstances along the lines of that, but even the last few months, I've been trying to figure out what's going to happen when I graduate.
Sure.
And I was putting in like all this effort looking at PhD schools all over the place. And I was trying to email schools and not getting anything back. And I was like, what is happening? And then when I really thought about it, I was like, I think I'm meant to just stay in Oklahoma. Maybe I'm just going to look at OSU and OU and see what those can open up for me. So that's where I've been focusing my attention now. But like, I think it was the thought of, I want to see if I can get into this school, or I want to see if I can get into this school. Let's see what can happen. And yeah, like your own hopes and dreams, that's okay too. But I think you start to realize like, maybe I don't need to go there, or maybe that's not where I'm meant to go. And you kind of start to realize some things.
Yeah. I guess the way I was asking the question, I meant it a little differently, but maybe I didn't do a good job of like paraphrasing my thoughts. But I guess what I was trying to get at was more so putting in effort in that direction in some sense. Because it's kind of like what you said, I guess, to use your example of looking to go to school for a PhD and like trying to go to different universities. you still have to try to apply outside, right? Like,
God's not just giving them that.
Exactly.
Yes.
That was sort of like, I guess, what I was trying to get at, is that we have to shoot our shot. But I guess, and maybe this is just because of some personal things that have happened recently in my life, but it's sort of a thought of how much harder should I push, or should I push at all? So it just makes me wonder. But that's maybe something for me to sit and think about a little more. But are you an overthinker?
Oh yeah, definitely.
How do you draw a line between these things, or do you draw a line at all? You don't?
No, probably not. My overthinking definitely like contradicts God all the time.
In what way?
Just not allowing to trust or like
I
trust that
see.
it's going to be okay. I want to do everything on my own.
Yeah.
I think right now that's a lot of what's going through my head because there are so many unknowns of what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
When my thesis is done, when this is done. And the overthinking of, I need to get out here and be talking to all these and this and this and this to make sure that I'm giving myself the greatest chance possible. And I got to do this stuff and this stuff. And it's, and yes, in a sense, you do have to do some of that, but it's the also not trusting that, like, if it's meant to be, God will make sure it works too.
Yeah.
Not like putting yourself like through the roof trying to get stuff out or do those different sides of things. Like, obviously you have to make yourself like known and get yourself out there and do all of that. But I think it would also offer me some peace if I could just like relax my brain and be like, just like calm down and figure out my path and what I for sure want to do. Because I think right now, what is scrambled in my brain is being like, well, a PhD may not work out. So I also have to have jobs lined up, and I need to have this lined up, and I need to have this lined up. If I could just stop the overthinking and just be like, focus on one thing at a time, we'll see, like, we'll get it going. I feel like that would just be easier.
Right. Because I think what you kind of just said is sort of like shooting in a dark room, right? Like, you don't know where you're shooting. I guess there's a better way of phrasing that. I can't think of what the actual phrase is, but it's like you're just shooting blindly, I suppose.
Yeah.
In some sense. Because that effort could be better directed, I suppose.
Yes.
Is a thought that even I have often. It's like, I'm putting in so much thought thinking about all of this stuff, and maybe I should just sit down and do it.
Yeah.
So it's something that I think I'm learning and figuring out myself. So I'll get there at some point. That's the hope, at least.
Yes.
But yeah, you said something very important about the trust aspect of it, right? Because I guess that's the other element of it. When you accept, you also have to trust that there's something good that's out there.
Yeah. I think that is the hardest part. And honestly, like, for me, it's something that in a lot of situations in my life, I haven't realized until like after the fact that, like, I probably should have just trusted God because this is the way it worked out.
Yeah.
But that can be so hard.
Yeah.
We live obviously in a worldly world where, there is so much going on and so much outside pressure of a variety of sorts to get the job right away or do this right away and do this right away. And it kind of goes back to that whole thing along the plan or the timing. When you have these outside pressures, I feel like that makes it even harder on your brain to know what to do in that situation.
Yeah.
A lot of times, you know, in the Bible or through God, we're told to wait. Like, I have a plan for you. It'll all come. Just wait. That is so hard. I'm not a person who can wait. That is one of the hardest things that I have to do.
Yeah.
In a lot of different situations. But I think it's just good to know that in the waiting or during the time before, you know, you're also learning a lot of things too. I've had a lot of situations in my life where, like, you know, something hasn't gone right and you're like, why isn't this working? You know, even this is just such like a easy example, but a breakup, you're like, okay, why? Like, I thought I was ready for this. Like, God's like, no, just wait. It'll happen when it's ready to happen. That's the hardest thing to like hold on to.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of those. But I think it's the part of getting to that trust. And I think for me, there will be days where I trust it fully and there will be days where it wavers and I come in and out of it.
Absolutely.
I think that's very normal for a lot of people.
That's just human. It makes us more human. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's just knowing that in the end, God has a plan for us.
Yeah.
One of my favorite Bible verses, I have it tattooed, but it's Jeremiah 29:11. And it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future." It's one of my favorites because it reminds me that the plan that God has, you know, there's going to be there's going to be some waiting, but there's going to be some good.
Yeah.
And everybody's on their own timeline. It's going to come.
Right.
And in that it says not to harm you. Like, you might learn some lessons. You might hit some pain or some sad times, but it's only to get you to a better spot.
Yeah.
And so that's what I, over the past couple of years, have tried to remind myself more. I will say, like, it has helped with my overthinking and worrying and anxiety in a lot of great ways. I still have those. Like, they're still going to be there. There's going to be days where, like, I'm like, my anxiety completely takes over. I'm not going to lie. But I think it's knowing that where I'm at right now is where I'm meant to be at.
Right.
I'm not behind anybody and I'm not in front of anybody. We're all on our own path. We shouldn't be competing with other people. That can be so hard to look at, but that's what I try to remind myself.
Yeah, because I think the way social media works is sort of, it fuels that intentionally or unintentionally. It fuels a lot of the comparison fed thoughts that we have.
Yeah.
But then I guess making that separation to be like, I am where I need to be and that I'll figure it out is so important to do. And I think it's also very important to reiterate this, I guess, in a different, like, reframed perspective, in that the thing that we have control over is how much effort we put into it. So I guess, to put it simply, like, we have to give it our all, but detach ourselves from the outcome of it.
Yeah.
The Gita talks about this a lot. It's reiterated in many different verses of the Bhagavad Gita, but it talks about detaching yourself from the outcomes of your actions and solely acting on the things that you need to act on, and so on. So that's quite hard to do, because I think it's a nature of... Correct me if I'm wrong. Are you a bit of a control freak as well?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, no, because just based on the things that you said, it's sort of...
Yeah.
Because I'm the same way too. So it's sort of like, you can't control everything. Just calm the fuck down. You just can't control everything. You
Literally.
can't. Yeah.
If I would love to, if I could. Don't get me wrong. Like, I would love to. I'm a person that struggles with change. Like, I wish I could control everything to make sure it's all good. But, yeah, like you said, like, you just got to go with it.
Yeah.
I think to add to some of what you said too, like, if we knew that we were going to go into something and fail, we either wouldn't do it,
Yeah.
or we wouldn't put in the effort. And a lot of times we're put in those situations to teach us something, to learn something new. We have such a bad perspective in the world of failing. But if I didn't fail a lot of times in life, I would be probably like a really bad stuck-up person, thinking that I was like great at everything.
Yeah.
Failing in a lot of areas has made me the person that I am, but has taught me so much about even the fact that like life isn't easy. And that's a huge one that like I think in a sense everybody has to know. Like you got to work for things.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be easy. There's going to be trials and tribulations and all this stuff. But like that just makes you who you are.
Yeah.
Makes you the person that you're meant to be. I know for me, like if I was told, hey, you're going to take this test today, but you're going to fail, I'd be like, I ain't taking it then.
Right. Why should I take it if I know I'm going to fail anyway?
Yeah. Those are just stepping stones to get you where you need to be, and that's a huge part of life.
Yeah. So this chair is leaning way too low. I guess it's a little broken down. I'm trying to stay up. Yeah, for sure. I think it's hard to navigate, right? I think because a lot of the outcomes are tied to where we might end up, or how, for example, our research projects might pan out. Because like the control thing has been a thought for me lately in terms of recruiting participants for my study, and like trying to like go to classrooms, talk to people, but only 2 of them coming and participating. And out of that, 1 of them doesn't finish through. I don't hear back from them ever. Right? So like just things like that. I'm just stating an example of a possible outcome. But that is a possibility, right? And in my head, I'm like, oh, like how can I make sure like that doesn't happen? Just do more. And which to some extent that is true. To some extent, it's also like, I have to do enough to where I'm satisfied with my effort. But then that doesn't mean that I burn myself out.
Yes.
And drawing that line is hard, but I think in this case, I have to try and detach myself from whether or not someone will choose to never come back to it, which is fine. Again, like to each their own, right? Like it's something that you can't necessarily control in that. Because I mean, out of the, maybe I shouldn't be going into specifics on a public platform, but out of X, I'll tell you the numbers after we're done recording, but out of like X number of people I've collected samples from already, like 10% of them, or not 10%, maybe 20% of them haven't come back. And it's like, what do you do? Like, yeah, and then that's where I'm like, okay, I have control over to try and reach out to other people that will do that, but that I'm trying to remind myself more. So I'll reach out to them. I'll try. Whether they respond back or not is not in my hands. But I'll keep trying for as long as I can. And we'll see what happens.
That's honestly like the hardest part in honestly any thesis project, but especially ones where you're working with other people.
Yeah.
Because you can't control what they do as much as you want to.
Yeah.
And as people, we like to just kind of form our own opinions and be like, whatever. It's fine. It's just his project. I'll be fine.
Yeah.
That's hard for the person that's running the project. Because I was sitting here trying to be like, oh yeah, like I agree. I can make my beat. Actually, that I can't. But like, my bees can't just be like, oh, whoop, we're not doing this. Like, it is so hard when you're working with other people.
Yeah. And I think that's okay, right?
Yeah,
Like,
it is.
I have no control over whether or not someone chooses to continue or not, or why someone chooses to take part in it in the first place. Maybe they think it's an interesting idea to explore, but then 5 days later they're like, oh, maybe not so much.
Yeah.
Fine. It is completely fine for them to stop doing it, right? I guess for me, I have to be like, that's okay on their part, and I have to make my peace with that.
Yeah.
And I think doing that is hard.
Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Especially when you go into it with a plan of, this is what I'm going to do, and, oh, this person's not coming anymore. It like flips this switch in your brain of being like, okay, so now what do I do? I might have to change this or do this. And that gets hard because when we start off with a plan, we want that to follow through.
Right. Yeah. So, I think I wonder this sometimes, and maybe I'm overthinking this more than like it needs to be thought about, but in some sense, like superimposing like lessons that we learn from our faith, right? Of like control and actions and detachment from results and so on. I can apply it to my research project. I can apply it to other things in life, right? Which I guess in some sense goes to show that it applies to everything in life in some sense.
It really does. If we really like sit down and evaluate it, like every decision we make or, everything we do in life, we're thinking about in some way or, evaluating it in some way of how we're going to do something.
Yeah.
Or we know that like God's helping us do this or God's putting this into my life. That really does influence a lot of what you do.
Yeah. We've gone for like close to an hour and 40 minutes or so. Let's gradually bring this to a close.
Okay.
Any sort of closing thoughts or parting thoughts in terms of some positive teachings from faith that keep you going on a daily basis?
Ooh, positive teachings. I think a big one for me that I've really learned is just having like good community around you. That's been huge for me down here. And probably a main reason that like I want to stay kind of close to Oklahoma. Why I've probably been telling people now that Oklahoma's my home. And not saying that I didn't have that back home.
Sure.
I definitely did. But when you come to someplace new, one of the greatest things is to get community. And that can be really hard to do. And I was really thankful to find that in a lot of places, if it was at UCO, in the FSI or church or outside friends. But people that want to make you a better person, people that push you to be closer to God too, and people that want to see you succeed. I've been lucky to find that in a lot of places down here.
That's awesome.
And that kind of goes to wrap up all of this about Oklahoma and all of that. But if I had to encourage anybody, if they were looking to explore like their faith or moving somewhere new, I would definitely say find that community.
Right.
People that are just going to be there for you.
Yeah.
That's a huge, huge thing, because I could find God and want to be in my Bible and doing all of that, but it's hard to keep yourself accountable. And it's hard to stay doing something if there's not others around you doing it too.
True.
And so I don't just mean that in terms of like the Bible or going to church. That's in a lot of things. Like if I didn't have friends in our class that were also going through their thesis, it'd be so hard for me to sit there and do my thesis.
Yeah.
Even just different things in life, like to be there for one another, to explore life together. Like that is a huge thing that people need. And I'm not saying you need a huge friend group either, but Just find some people that want to make you a better person.
Beautiful. Awesome. Yeah, because I think that's something that also with our community is very easy to feel alone, right? Because
100%.
you have nobody to rely on, a shoulder to cry on, or whatever it may be, right?
Yeah.
I did not intend for that to rhyme, but anyway, I'll stop patting myself in the back for that in my head. But no, it's beautiful to have community, and I guess wherever you find that, like, give it the energy it deserves, so that
100%.
you can sort of build that community, because you can't be alone for too long. And maybe I'm saying this to myself in some sense, but
I know I can't. Like,
yeah,
it was terrifying for me. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'd moved all the way to Ontario and done that, but doing it again and moving somewhere where you know nobody
right,
was terrifying.
I'm sure.
I was 23 years old and you feel like you have like your life all worked out and it's going to be great, and all of a sudden you're moving somewhere new. I would not have lasted down here if it wasn't for people. And specifically the people that I've met.
Right.
Don't get me wrong, it hasn't been easy. I've had my ups and downs when I've been here too, but a huge reason of why I've kept going is the people that are here.
Right.
And the people that are there for me when I need anything. Like, it's huge. And it is, you need a support system.
Yeah, absolutely. I think knowing what will work best for you also sort of goes through this process of meeting angels and meeting assholes, right?
Yes.
It's sort of like figuring out what works best for you. And I mean, maybe I'm a little mean by saying assholes, but it's just more a matter of figuring out the people that might work best for you.
Yeah.
Because I'm not saying people who I don't gel with are assholes, but I guess we just don't have the same frequency, if you will, or the things that I want to have same frequency on. And that's okay. Like, that's okay. Work towards finding the people who will match your frequency wherever.
100%.
Yeah. But at the same time, be willing to work towards that as well, right? Because I think in some sense, we have these expectations of, okay, people should meet this, but what am I doing to get there?
Yeah.
Is also a question to ask ourselves.
Yeah.
More often than not.
Exactly.
So.
And I think it's good to have different friend groups too. Like, I loved our cohort, and I still do.
Yeah.
We were a great group of people.
I agree. Yeah.
But sometimes you need to separate yourself from school too.
Yeah.
And you need that break. Or if it's your work friends, you need to separate yourself from them. Sometimes you just need that brain break. And I love that I can message like my one group of friends and be like, I just need to hang with you girls today because like I need to take my mind off of, school for the day.
Those bees.
Them damn bees. But yeah, it is like, it's so nice to have those different groups and different supports in different areas for different things. That's been a huge factor. I know that I probably would not still be down here if it wasn't for the people.
Awesome. I think that's a very good note to sort of close this off on. Thank you so much, Jordan.
Of course.
For indulging me in all of my questions.
Yes. Hope you learned something about farming and
Yes,
cows.
I did learn how hay is made, and that is just dried grass.
Yeah.
And a lot of other things about cows. But yeah, in all honesty, thank you so much, Jordan. I appreciate it.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, for those of you watching, thank you so much. We will see you guys. Let me try and sit up a little. We'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, Prateek.
Yeah, not a problem.